Dell finally fixed the touch-sensitive keys on the new XPS 14, and honestly, it's almost a perfect Windows laptop. But there is one hidden flaw in this keyboard that could be a total deal-breaker, especially if you're spending over $2,000. Let's talk about why you might want to wait before hitting that buy button. When you first pick up the XPS 14, the build quality tells you right away that your money was well spent, because the entire body feels like it was carved from a single block of metal. It's incredibly thin at just over half an inch, but because it's so rigid, you can grab it by one corner or throw it into a backpack and never worry about the chassis flexing or creaking. Now, the most common question people ask is, did they fix those annoying touch-sensitive keys? And the answer is yes. Dell finally brought back real physical buttons that click, which means you can actually feel what you're doing without looking down. This connects perfectly to the new touchpad that now has defined edges, so your hand always knows exactly where the borders are. It makes the whole experience feel much more polished than the older models. But as good as the outside looks, the part that actually makes people stop mid-conversation is what Dell hid under the lid. Dell gives you two choices for the screen, and the gap between them is so massive that it completely changes how you'll end up using the laptop. You could save some cash and go with a standard LCD panel, but then you'd be missing out on the 2880 by 1800 OLED version, which is in a completely different league. Since it's an OLED with a 120Hz refresh rate, every scroll feels buttery smooth, and the blacks are actually pitch black, unlike that washed out gray you see on cheaper screens. But I know what you're thinking. Is it bright enough to use outdoors? Well, Dell claims 500 nits, but in real testing, it's closer to 380, which means if you're sitting near a bright sunny window, you might find yourself squinting a bit. It's a small trade-off for those vibrant colors, but that high resolution also demands a lot of power, which leads us directly into how this thing actually handles a heavy workload. Performance is the heart of this machine is the new Intel Core Ultra X7, and it performs so differently from what Intel was making even a year ago. Because this is the Panther Lake architecture, it handles 50 Chrome tabs without breaking a sweat. And that smoothness is not just because of the processor alone. The reason everything stays consistently fast even after hours of heavy use is the RAM situation, and this is where you need to pay attention before you order. One thing Dell does not advertise loudly is that the RAM is permanently soldered onto the board, meaning 5 years from now, when your work gets heavier, you cannot upgrade it. So if you are buying this to keep for the long term, get at least 32 gigabytes now. You will thank yourself later, meaning you can't upgrade it later. So if you're planning to keep this for 4 or 5 years, getting at least 32 gigabytes is the move so you don't hit a bottleneck down the road. This extra memory also helps the integrated Arc B390 graphics, which actually shocked me in my testing. Get this thin laptop can run Cyberpunk 2077 at over 60 FPS, which sounds impossible for a machine without a dedicated graphics card. In fact, it actually beats the NVIDIA RTX 4050 from last year's model, which means you can finally have a professional work laptop that handles a gaming session in the evening without needing a second device. But even with all that power, the biggest surprise is how long you can stay away from a power outlet. Now, the question I keep getting in the comments, is this finally better than the MacBook Pro? Honestly, the M4 still leads in single-core performance, and if you are already inside Apple's ecosystem, switching will create friction that this laptop does not eliminate. But the XPS 14's OLED display is sharper than the base MacBook Pro's panel. The battery result is genuinely competitive, and the Arc B390 graphics keeps pace with M4's integrated GPU in real benchmarks. This is the first Windows laptop where that comparison does not feel embarrassing for the Windows side. When it comes to the battery life, the number one thing people search for is, does the XPS 14 battery actually last all day? Dell claims 21 hours, but in the real world with a heavy workload, you're looking at about 14 to 15 hours of solid screen time. What this means for you is that you can leave your charger at home in the morning, go through a full workday, and still have enough juice left to watch a movie on the ride home. And to make sure you have space for all those files, the Gen 5 SSD inside this machine opens large Premiere Pro projects and heavy Lightroom catalogs almost before you finish double-clicking them. For anyone who worked with big files daily, that difference in response time is something you feel within the first hour. So moving large 4K video files or opening massive apps happens almost instantly. But even with all these high-end specs, there is one hidden flaw on the keyboard that might be a complete deal breaker for some of you. Here's the part most reviewers gloss over. On some units, the keyboard actually misses letters if you type too fast. If you're a professional writer or coder who flies across the keys, you might see 10 errors in a single paragraph, which is incredibly frustrating for a laptop that costs over $2,000. Dell is pushing updates to fix this, but my advice is to test your specific unit the moment it arrives. If the keys register perfectly, you've got the best Windows laptop of 2026. But if they don't, you need to know before that return window closes. So is it worth a $1,699 starting price? If you want that incredible OLED screen and the best battery life on Windows, then yes. But if you're worried about that keyboard or need more ports, if the keyboard issue concerns you and reliability is your top priority, the Lenovo ThinkPad X914 is worth a serious look. I just finished the full comparison between these two, and the results genuinely surprised me. That video is linked right here. In fact, I just finished a deep dive comparing the XPS 14 to the Lenovo ThinkPad X9 to see which one is actually more reliable for long-term work. You can check that video out right here.